Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today I'm continuing my coverage of the Tribeca Film Festival with the documentary Shadow Scholars. And this year's documentaries at Tribeca have really impressed me. So briefly, Shadow Scholars follows Patricia Kingori, the youngest black female professor in Oxford's 925-year history, as she investigates Kenya's hidden essay mills, an industry where an estimated 40,000 highly educated yet underemployed Kenyans earn a living by writing academic papers for wealthy Western students. The documentary includes interviews with students who pay for these services and those who provide these services for a very high fee. This was such a comprehensive and thought-provoking film about the state of education around the world. The documentary takes us all around the globe to explore why Kenya has garnered a reputation for having the best ghostwriters in the world and how the Western world is taking advantage of it. Kenya is the African dream. It is a country filled with highly ambitious and highly educated young men and women willing to work hard to make their dreams come true. However, their hard work has gone unrewarded by the government, forcing young people to create their own pathways for financial stability. The documentary slowly and methodically walks us through this underground industry to expose Western hypocrisy. Roughly 35 million students in the US have outsourced their work to a third-party website. And when you think about these numbers all around the world, it's likely a lot higher than we're ready to hear. Students that go on these websites looking for writers come from a range of institutions, including the so-called best in the world. Over the years, countless stories have exposed the fact that if you have enough resources and connections, you can buy your way into the best universities in the world. This has raised some serious questions regarding the credibility of university, especially considering its increasingly inflated costs. Students who pay for these services often cite being overworked as the top reason. One student in the documentary notes how she had to sell nude photos of herself in order to afford to pay a writer. Now, there is something to be said about the heavy burden placed on students. During COVID, students were actually burdened with more work than ever, and they were spending most of their time in front of a screen, which damaged their mental health. In addition, the job market has diminished the value of a bachelor's degree, leading many students to supplement their degree with certifications or courses in order to get a job. I believe the growing demand for these third-party services and even AIs like ChatGPT reflects a broader shift in how people are perceiving the value of these degrees and having a meaningful impact on their lives. The appearance of having a degree has become more important than the substance of what it truly represents. A lot of institutions are paralyzed in dealing with the problem. They're ill-equipped and they lack the knowledge to really know where to start. University has always been more of a grading process than a learning process. And in today's increasingly competitive job market, grades have become more important, especially since students are staying in university a lot longer. A lot more students have to pursue master's degrees just to be eligible for entry-level jobs. Many of the essay writing services are run by Kenyans. What's more interesting is the students using these essay writing websites have no idea. These Kenyan writers are under immense pressure to produce essays in a very tight timeline and produce essays that will earn a very high grade. In addition, they're doing all of this under a pseudonym. I was so impressed by how these writers in Kenya are able to immerse themselves in topics completely unfamiliar to them and rival the expertise of the professors reading them. One moment that stood out at me is when one of the Kenyan writers interviewed described how she dreamt of going to Harvard and she thinks about Harvard often and she wonders if she could get into Harvard from Kenya. And I just kept thinking, with the skills she possesses, Harvard needs her more than she needs Harvard. Because many universities, especially if we're talking about the top universities, claim to host the best and the brightest, this comes with a significant advantage for those students who are admitted and end up graduating from these universities, not just in terms of job opportunities, but also in social perception. Often these students are perceived as smarter and more capable than other students. While in Kenya, you have writers completing master's level essays in a few hours. The purpose of the documentary is to try and explore the social implications for those buying the essays and those selling them. Those buying the essays have an even more leg up in life than they did before. Hiring a third party not only saves you energy, but saves you time, and time is slowly becoming the world's most important resource. In general, students tend to spend a lot of time on very tedious and meaningless work. In addition, you have to calculate the time of going to and from class, and it's getting increasingly more difficult to justify the time spent and the price being paid. Why am I taking a course about measuring my shadow from the height of a building when I'm a biochem student? A lot of the prerequisites and courses that universities force students to take honestly have nothing to do with their majors. They have to take them in order to get to the course they need for their job. And a lot of the coursework honestly does feel like filler. While the writers offering these services are often demonized and shunned and burdened with the pressure of ending the trade. Additionally, they receive no societal benefits. I mean, even though it's not illegal, it's still heavily stigmatized. One moment that stood out to me is when Patricia is describing how Kenya is garnering a reputation for facilitating cheating abroad. It's heartbreaking because you want your country to be known for having its own Silicon Valley, for producing great writers, revolutionary technology. At one point, Patricia has a very eye-opening conversation with an ethics professor about morality. In her mind, those offering the services are in the wrong, and they're telling themselves whatever they have to tell themselves in order to alleviate any guilt. She goes on to say that the goal of a university is to graduate students who will act ethically in the workplace and try and do the right thing. And the whole time she's having this conversation with this ethics professor, I just kept thinking, what world is this lady talking about? And I think when you can't really explain something, it's very common to outsource the blame to someone else. Her logic is they should stop so we don't have to. Universities tend to be more concerned with maintaining their own reputation than facilitating student success. The priority is to make sure that students reflect well on the institution, even if it means overlooking very deep issues. Students who use these services are ultimately responsible for ensuring they graduate with the skills they're paying to learn, not the writers in Kenya who already possess these skills. And to be honest, most people end up with degrees they don't even end up using. There's also another conversation to be had about how a lot of companies have to retrain students because the skills they're learning at these universities are either not enough or just completely useless. One thing the documentary really pointed out is the political dilemma a lot of these universities are in. Universities have to be very careful in not blaming students because at the end of the day, this is a business. First of all, proving plagiarism is very, very difficult. It's getting increasingly difficult. It used to be that a student would just copy a paper they found online. Now they're able to generate one from scratch from either hiring someone or using an AI. And you could actually continue this documentary into a part 2 and really explore what would happen if universities really crack down on the issue properly. How would that affect their financial stability? How would that affect all the donors, all these brand deals? I mean, a lot of universities have partnerships with AIs that facilitate cheating. And so why is it okay for universities to accept money from these AIs, but not their students to use them? When you think of university as a business, at the end of the day, customer satisfaction is key. People are paying hundreds and thousands of dollars for this piece of paper, and they expect results, and those results are reflected in the grade. And if you start kicking people out because of plagiarism, what does that do to your reputation? What does that do to your standing in the world? Ethically, I think universities are avoiding their own responsibilities in terms of rethinking whether or not these assignments are really enhancing student learning or justifying the cost of tuition. The documentary does a good job of really explaining the importance of grades, and Patricia uses her own experience. Growing up, grades were a symbol of hard work, intelligence, and gratitude. And I could relate because honestly, getting high grades is not really just for yourself, it's also for your family. And so you feel incredibly guilty when you're not able to achieve a certain result. And so imagine a hardworking student just getting by. Meanwhile, their classmate is earning A's by hiring another writer or using a ChatGPT. How awful would you feel? One of the most compelling moments in the documentary is when Patricia shares a story about a time when a senior professor copied her work, and when she spoke up, she was reprimanded for even implying that someone of such high standing would need to steal from a student. I think this perfectly encapsulates the crux of Patricia's investigation. These Western students want their ideas, but they don't want them. A lot of universities, especially the best in the world, continue to prioritize privilege over talent. The Kenyan writers interviewed spoke very passionately about the work and all the benefits they were gaining from writing all these assignments and all these new skills they were acquiring, skills that the person hiring them should have been acquiring. Sadly, all this experience counts for nothing in a market trying to make them out to be criminals. The rapid pace at which Western students are advancing by either hiring a writer or using a ChatGPT is really calling into question the credibility of the education system as a whole. Even if these highly educated Kenyans wanted to work abroad, restrictive visa policies and hiring biases of many high-paying companies make this an uphill battle. If you can find a way to get ahead on the backs of someone who will never be granted the privilege to compete in the same space as you, why not take advantage? And this conversation can be applied outside of universities, and it can be applied to the workplace. The amount of money these writers are getting paid is nowhere near the value of the service they're providing. They are helping them get ahead. They are making them look good. One Kenyan writer explains how he would often text with professors about the essays he would submit for different students. The amount of time these writers are spending on these essays could have been spent producing something great or writing something really groundbreaking. It's bad enough that a lot of labor-intensive jobs are outsourced to places like Kenya, and the thought that even if you even the playing field, it won't really make a difference. They'll just outsource a different type of work to them is really scary. The pressure on Kenya to make this trade illegal speaks to the grave power imbalance between these two parts of the world and how this power imbalance is getting worse. Education is no longer the great equalizer. How can we truly measure the value of an idea if the person who came up with the idea is denied recognition for it? Now, AI, I have mixed feelings about AI, but AI does not generate great ideas. It refines bad ideas. So whatever thoughts you have in your head, it just makes them sound really good, but that doesn't really change the fact that the idea is terrible. The issue of hiring a writer is that you're building your career off the back of someone else. And I think what this documentary highlights really well is how easy it's become to steal other people's ideas and how little recourse individuals have, especially if they are from a part of the world that has fewer advantages. There's one scene where Patricia is being shown an archive of past essays and studies. The documents include information about the student and even participants in different studies. For example, if a student is conducting cancer research and outsources their work, sensitive patient information may have been shared with the writer they hired, information that's now online for everybody to see. And from this, you catch a glimpse of the broader implications of this issue. This issue affects more than just the students buying and selling these services. It also impacts the countless lives of individuals who could be influenced by essays, reports, and studies presented as authentic and ethical by universities who grade and publish them. I think it takes a certain level of privilege to have the audacity to share sensitive information with a stranger online. Many of the Kenyan writers truly sympathize with the students they're helping. Anyone who's been a student understands how hard it is to survive a very unforgiving environment. Regardless of who wrote the paper, the ideas presented in the paper are still very valid. And the issue then becomes, does cheating invalidate these ideas? And who gets to determine the value of these ideas, and who ultimately will be able to get credit for it? And also, who has the power to decide over these issues and why? I think what Patricia demonstrates very well through her research is how power operates in the dark. When Australia is putting pressure on Kenya to criminalize these essay mills, who are they really protecting? They're protecting these billion-dollar industries that depend on being seen as gatekeepers of knowledge and success. The issue isn't that the problem exists. The issue is that everyone knows that the problem exists. And we can't really pretend it's a few bad apples. I mean, the whole tree is rotten. And there's something very devastating about meeting people who are very intelligent and very capable, longing to be acknowledged as such by people who are not. I don't know how I feel about AI yet. I think the world will be most kind to those who know how to maximize these tools. AI is pretty much making it pointless to hire an essay writer at this point, so there's actually no need to criminalize them. However, AI still facilitates cheating and theft, and no one's really figured out a way to regulate this. And the problem is likely to worsen, especially as students become more advanced at prompt engineering and learning how to get the most out of their AIs. I mean, some students have even given their AIs a pet name at this point. Patricia has spent her life investigating power and how power is reinforced and maintained. The ease in which students are able to pay others to do their work, coupled with the difficulty universities have in detecting these practices, really call into question whether or not universities should continue to be granted the power to give credit for ideas, or more critically determine the legitimacy of published work and the recognition it receives. Overall, I highly recommend this film. I think it should be mandatory viewing for all higher educational institutions. I think many instructors and professors don't really appreciate how advanced students have become in outsourcing their work and using these AIs. It's no longer struggling or unmotivated students looking for shortcuts. Future lawyers, scholars, and professionals are building their academic reputation often based on work that isn't their own. And especially if they are hiring writers to generate their reports, they are building their careers at the expense of people who are powerless to stop them. So please look out for this documentary. I thought it was so timely. I thought it was so thoughtful, so comprehensive, extremely well done. Again, this research could go on and on and on. I think the results would really have you question whether or not universities are this educational space or these criminal enterprises. And so until next time.